Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Kevin. Kevin, for everyone out there listening, please introduce yourself.
Hey there, Robbie. My name is Kevin Corti. I guess you could call me a technologist. Professionally, I'm what's known as a user experience researcher, or a UX researcher for short. That just means that I study how people use technology, and I try to understand what they need technology to do for them, what their attitudes and beliefs are about technologies that exist. I've worked in Silicon Valley for the last, 7 years now. Currently at Google, is formerly at Uber as a data scientist. So I got to survey some of the sort of really interesting areas of consumer tech product development. Prior to sort of my foray into Silicon Valley tech, I was in academia. I did a PhD in social psychology at the London School of Economics in the UK. My work there explored a variety of things, human-computer interaction among them, and that's sort of why I ended up kind of doing UX research in the tech space. What I was primarily trying to do with the work I was doing in grad school was to create new methodologies for understanding how people perceive one another face-to-face, especially when that communication is mediated by technologies of different varieties. So that's a little bit about me, kind of what I do, my background.
Well, if I was going to test the water, if I was going to dip my toe in the pool and be able to tell if it's hot or cold, where do you feel on technology?
Where do I feel on technology? Well, it's a big topic, right?
Yeah.
So I guess as a sort of general caveat here, I think that it would be fair to communicate to your listeners. A lot of what I'm going to communicate, I think, to you is going to be kind of informed by a lot of that sort of academic lens on the technology space that sort of predates my professional career. Certainly not an authority on all things Google. Google is certainly in the space of a lot of different technologies, both very familiar to people as well as some that are obviously in development. But I think that I could be best I could best communicate some of these perspectives that you're going to ask about through the lens of kind of, again, this sort of like academic or social psychologically informed approach. And so to answer your question, what do I think about technology? I tend to look at people's use of technology through three different lenses. What I call the sort of macro, meso, and micro world of user experience with technology, or user kind of orientation to an integration with the world of technology. So at the sort of micro level of user experience with technology, you have sort of the moment by moment interaction with a piece of technology. You can a very mundane piece of technology like a watch or a can opener. How does it look? How does it feel? I work with a lot of designers who are interested in kind of industrial engineering and ergonomics, who really try to think about how could we create technologies that feel intuitive, that make the user or the people that are embracing the technology kind of have a clear intuition or understanding of what to do with that technology, or how it works, how to make decisions with that technology. At the sort of meso world of this sort of lens on how people have a relationship with technology, you have what's called like a user journey, meaning sort of like, how do you use technology to complete goals? So let's take an app like Instagram, for example. Typically, people are using Instagram to do things. They have goals in mind. They want to share photos with friends and family. They want to follow an expert or an influencer or an account that they find has very compelling content. Maybe they want to use it for business or for marketing purposes if they're selling a product. So those are what we call goals, and all of that, the sort of way you get to an end goal with the product are sort of like You can decompose all the activities necessary to arrive at an end state of a goal through all the things that happen down in that micro world, right? Like how does the look and feel and touch build that intuition of how to do the tasks that get you toward a goal. And then finally, at the macro level of user experience, I think this is where I think we're going to spend most of our time talking, which is how do people form these sort of long-term relationships with products, individual products or product spaces across long spans of time. So you can think of like an iPhone as a product which people don't just use for one goal or use in one particular moment. They have a relationship with it over time. I got my first iPhone, let's say, like 2010, for example, and I've had many versions of it as they've come out, but it's very much a product that have had a relationship with, for lack of a better term to describe it. And so a lot of what I do as a social scientist in this field is I kind of look at that sort of relationship element of how people orient to technology. And again, that could be very mundane technology from, how do people, one of the things that people have a long-term relationship with in terms of technology is something like their bank, right? Yeah. You're going to have a bank account open for years. You might use it for various purposes or goals at different times, but it's something that kind of you use over the course of your lifetime and you have a relationship with it. But it's a sort of mundane thing, at least in the Western world, where having a relationship with a bank is more common. But then you have sort of relationships with technologies that don't even exist yet, right? Because they only exist in your imagination, right? So we have these conceptions about where technology is taking us, or where current technologies will evolve to, and we have sort of anticipatory relationships with those things.
Yeah.
You could think of something like nuclear energy as falling into that category, where there are very mundane utilizations of that technology, and for the most part throughout its history it's been incredibly safe. All it's meant to do, again in those mundane examples, is to provide you electricity and energy in the way that would replace things like coal or other means of doing that. But nonetheless, humans, as a society, as a collective, we have these sort of imaginations about particular end states or evolutions in that technology that can be both very promising and both very scary. And based on how you orient it or how populations oriented, it can very much shape the evolution of that technology. And that's where you get into things like technology regulation. If we're anticipating a very negative outcome state for society with a piece of technology, well, then that's what regulation is supposed to do, or that's what the minds that come together to think about the guardrails to put around technology have to do, is to make sure that we get to that end state where that piece of technology is good. So I know that's a broad sort of overview of sort of where my interests are and where I've sort of the different themes that I've dipped into and out of at various courses of my career and academic life, but there you have it. Where do you want to go from there?
So I want to make sure that I'm just being clear here. I didn't want you to think that I was going to like attack you on Google or start diving down into Google, because there's probably stuff you can't speak about. And as well too, I don't really want to go down that route. I'm looking at the grand aspect of when it comes to society, if it's good and bad, on the concept of, I think it's much like anything that's created, we tend to use it in the way that it was intended to be used for, but then it starts to go down some darker rabbit holes where we start to go a little bit too far with it. Now, a can opener, you can do multiple things with a can opener, but you can't do everything. The internet happens to be that exception. And I feel like when we talk about like the positives of it, the way that I kind of look at it is like, if a person's dealing with depression and they go to a suicide helpline, there's a chat bot that's able to talk to them and really kind of talk them down from a horrible situation or a choice that they are thinking about making. Now, the negative part about it is it's now become people's social identities. And that's where we get to this weird line where it comes with social media. I mean, more people, like, it was a delicacy. Now it's a requirement. The internet for a lot of things now is now a requirement. And I start wondering like what the future of people's minds are going to be like. Like, I think slowly we're losing basic functions or capabilities of our just regular everyday life, and we're starting to replace them with technology, which enters the realm of the metaverse, which enters all these things. So I'm not talking about corporations or anything. I'm just talking about a broader scale of humanity when it comes to the I guess the resiliency we have to bounce back after having something be a part of our lives for so long. Because talking with astrophysicists who talk about solar flares and just common things, electrical mishaps that could happen at any time, you could have all technology be wiped out, whether it's an EMP, whatever. I just start looking at like, when the internet goes off and you start staring at your modem after you've unplugged it multiple times and you don't want to call that service provider, I'm like, you realize like a big part of your day is now gone. You can't watch TV necessarily if your cable's out. You can't go on the internet. You can't check Facebook, can't check Instagram if you don't have data that you're using on your phone. But imagine if that was all gone at a grand scale. I was like, how would people communicate? I think a lot of our social issues that we face are because we've let a device do a lot of it for us. Now, in a sense, it started off with good intentions, but that's how they pave the worst roads in a sense, is that it starts off good and it kind of goes down from there because you don't have the communication. For instance, if I send you an email or if I send you a text, I could be like, yeah, we're just going to have a chat. That can come off in many different ways. That can come off as me just saying, yeah, we're going to have a chat. Or it can come off as, yeah, we're going to have a chat. Or it's going to come off in so many different ways that your brain's trying to convey what this person is trying to say. And I think we've gotten to this point now where a lot of things boil down to the essence of communication. It's not being done effectively. That's why I talk to so many people and try and get different perspectives in my head, because you never know what a person means until you actually hear them say it. But people see a text, people see the online tweets, and they have the need to start fighting because somehow it's got them on level 11 when they shouldn't be at level 11. They should be at like level 1 or 2. And I think especially with algorithms showing you different things and depending on where that goes as well too, I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on the whole social issues that fall behind technology? I would say, because I mean it's beneficial, it is, I'm not going to say it's not, but it's got some crazy rabbit holes that people somehow, I guess, accidentally slip into. It's like if you have your house littered with bear traps and you just walk down blindfolded. That's what everyone's doing at this point.
You're right. So you brought up a lot there. I think that one of the first things you mentioned was sort of like this dependence on technology, and perhaps that makes us vulnerable in many ways. If we're dependent on something, if it were to go away or to be taken from us, what do we do? What happens when the internet goes out? What happens when the electricity goes out? I think that that's actually a pattern that, of course, we experience that with the technologies that we've grown up with and experienced and that have come to be dependent on, but it's not necessarily a unique situation humans have been in throughout the course of civilization. I mean, and maybe that's why it would be worth just simply defining what we mean by technology. There are I mean, I think that when the word technology is spoken, people think of obviously the objects in their world that get branded as technological devices, right? The computers, the phones, the trains, the airplanes, all of that stuff. That is certainly a category of technology, and the sort of tangible, physical, you can even call it artificial types of technology, and that it sort of stands outside of the natural world, so to speak. But there are other categories of technology that humans have relied on with the same vulnerability that you just described throughout human history. I mean, so the earliest humans, for example, were dependent on local sources of stone to make their bows and arrows or their hunting devices. Well, what happens when their access to that stone quarry or that ability to get to that natural resource goes away, either through natural disaster or maybe through tribal conflict, that they sort of lose access to that resource? All of a sudden, a technology that very rudimentary cultural group in sort of prehistory humanity, they lose that ability to make progress, to manipulate their world, to go out and hunt, do very basic things for their survival, right? So humans have always been vulnerable to, say, the technology, to be the situation of becoming dependent on a technology that could at any moment be taken away from them, or that fundamentally, even if not taken away from them, creates a certain butterfly effect in how that group of people sort of evolves and orients to over time. Because again, as going back to my opening volley about these different sort of categories of relationship people have with technology, one of those categories is that sort of macro level long-term relationship where their identity becomes bound in those technologies. The ways that they communicate become dependent on those technologies. Certainly, the way that they transfer knowledge to new generations becomes dependent on that technology. I mean, just imagine those tribal hunters in my example losing access to that stone quarry to make their bows and arrows. All of a sudden, they no longer have a means of educating their children in that new generation on how to survive in the world because they had become dependent on a particular source of technology for their survival. So, not to dismiss the concern that you're presenting, because of course we are at any moment vulnerable to the things that we take for granted in the world, the ways in which our identities have become ingrained in these various technologies. Sort of, if that were to go away, yes, we would immediately feel that. That would be a gut punch for many of us, not just in the physical sense of sort of losing access to something in the world or a means of purchasing something. If my Amazon Prime account were to go away in the era of COVID, it might have been a lot harder to procure things easily than they otherwise were. But we also would lose sort of that psychological consistency and that identity that is bound up in the technology that we use. So both agree with the concerns that you're raising on both the sort of physical and psychological levels, but just pointing out that that's actually been human the situation of human human civilization throughout all of our history.
I would bring up a point of like, yeah, but it wasn't like if you were going to lose access to the quarry based on a natural disaster, then you would go find another material. But imagine if the natural disaster is another person who decides to cut off your internet or decides to do something to manipulate whatever and make sure that your business doesn't show up at the top of the list. Whether that
Mhm.
is this, whatever, not a search engine issue, if it's just a business or you didn't pay your domain, whatever it is,
Yep.
the issue is that the reliance on tech now and the internet has adapted so much, and it's not really the same as a stone quarry issue or some type of natural resource issue to build up your homes. This is something that's actually in the power of somebody else as well too. I don't know how my internet works. I don't know where it goes from when it leaves my home and it goes to the MediaCom person or whoever I'm getting my internet from, but at any moment they could just flip a switch and my whole day is ruined. You start getting into is that could be up to that person to have a bad day. I just look at it like a lot of people, like remember when Twitter and Facebook went down and Instagram went down and all these apps went down, people were going to other social engines to check if it was down and asking everyone else, like taking a census. Now that becomes an issue because I feel like that's an addiction quality there. Or we head into an area where, let's say, internet's down or social media is down, Twitter, Instagram, people go to another platform, but then when they use that other platform, besides asking, is it down, they're also taking like polls and they're identifying with like certain posts. Like we all know a Twitter post that goes up, for instance, and it says, should I get the espresso or should I get the chai latte? Now, the unintended consequence in that is the fact that this person now is asking for like a general public because they feel like they have so much of a following that people want to know or debate their drink for them. And I think that's a weird social thing in itself. Like my grandparents, maybe your grandparents or the people before them as well too, wouldn't be asking, they would ask a loved one, but then you get mixed up in the conflating emotions where you used to put up a post on I used this example a long time ago. You put up a post on Facebook saying, today was rough. Um, I can't believe you're gone. And everyone would like it and comment and like do whatever they had to do to make sure that they shared that empathy with you. But then the next day you put up another post similar to that and similar to that and similar to that. Then you watch your likes go up, but then on that last day or seventh day that you put up a post, it doesn't get any likes. You feel like, do people still care about me? What's happening? And then you have this weird identity kind of problem in your head where you start wondering, are you still valuable to the people out there that just follow you? And I think you mix your friendships up with the following. And that's, to me, that I just look at that from more of like a mental standpoint where, I mean, I went to school for psychology, but I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a licensed therapist or anything. I'm just going to let you know that I feel like when it comes to the emotional stability of people, that throws you off balance in a sense. And I talk to people my age who are on Instagram, Facebook 24/7. And I'm like, what? Like, stop taking photos of your food and enjoy the moment that you're in. More people have cell phone pictures and videos of a concert they went to than remembering the actual concert. The way they remembered it is looking through their phone to see the concert. And I think that has some unintended consequences as well too, with something as fragile as a resource that we are now calling the internet.
Well, look, yes, yes, and I think that what you're describing in terms of like, you know, what are the potential downsides of having an identity bound in these sort of social media platforms? I mean, yeah, I mean, certainly that's been a topic that's been explored. Unfortunately, we don't, social media hasn't been around for all that long, so we can't necessarily find an analog to it from a previous generation or the past to be able to say, okay, well, is this something that's really new, or does it just look new because the technology is exposing it? And there's been other researchers and technologists that have sort of more closely looked at the sort of psychosocial um, uh, sort of ramifications of social media, more so than I have. I mean, I know I was just listening to Lex Friedman's podcast a week or two ago when he had Mark Zuckerberg on, and Mark Zuckerberg was asked that question about the sort of the emotional potential downsides of a life mediated through heavy use of, say, Instagram. And Mark Zuckerberg gave the perspective that the research, at least from his point of view, I haven't looked at the research myself, but from his point of view, actually presents a more balanced view of the where the chips fall in terms of positives and negatives. Again, I haven't read the research directly to know the degree to which that's true or not, but you could tell that like it's something that he, at least at his level, is thinking about, and he has at his control, or at least distributed control across his company. These very, very broadly used and really new forms of social interaction. And so there's a complexity here of also kind of learning about the ramifications of these technologies in real time, right? We can't necessarily forecast with a high degree of precision what will come to be in terms of the social ramifications or the evolution of human culture as a result of these technologies. We just sort of have to draw from intuition. But the best we know is that yes, our identities are bound in technology. They always have been to a certain degree, as I described. Social forms of technology, like the ones you described, present a sort of new complexity to that relationship, and it's why there's so many researchers, in this space in academia, not just researchers, but concerned or curious people like yourself that want to know more and that are talking to people to learn more. And I have a fairly high degree of confidence that we are keeping a pulse as sort of a research and curiosity community on these things. Now, the degree to which that pulse is translating into things that might mitigate the negative consequences that you described, maybe that's to be debated. Yes, perhaps technology could be doing more, but it's yes and to everything you're saying.
Because now to get from all this long spiel to get to the kind of the thing here is I think there's a positive way to take it. I think there's a more beneficial aspect of AI, which is when I came across echoborg, for instance, and also some of the blog that you do as well too, where you talk about AI research and you kind of talk about like the positives innovations that are going in. I feel like that needs to be talked about a little bit more as well too. I think that this needs to be a direction that, like, I'm bringing the doom scenario here, but I know that there's a positive end to it. Like, I know that we can switch it and make it sure that we don't lead down this social issues and all this stuff that we're facing with by using technology in a more beneficial way. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on implementing that into society? Like, how can we use social media to actually do it like how we're doing, where me and you are having a conversation, we're able to talk like this. We can't get this from a text back and forth. But I feel like with AI creating music, which is amazing, by the way, that's also what my intro is AI created music.
Oh, is
Um,
it?
that's what I'm saying is it's so powerful, but it tends to be used in the worst kind of ways. Like if we talk about AI being used for bad, there's people that will use an AI and they'll have them do whatever and run off and steal data, do whatever they have to do, whatever they can with AIs. I don't know the full capabilities of it. But then there's positives. If there's a bot online that isn't like a Russian troll farm, but it happens to be something where a person comments a certain hashtag and that bot will retweet anything under that hashtag. That makes that person be like, oh, I got a retweet. Oh, I got a like. Oh, I got this. It might be a bot, but it also, the people who are following the bot are able to see that as well, too. Now, that can be negative as well, too, but I think that's a more positive intent of people being able to create stuff to highlight other people's work. Whether it's a machine that catches it every time that hashtag drops, that's still good for that person's exposure and they feel validated and continue the work that they're supposed to be doing. So there's positives to all of these stuff that goes on. But I want to make sure that we're not heading down the wrong track all the time when it comes to tech, which seems like it's so much easier than not to be like, I could slack off on Instagram all day, or I can sit there and follow a bunch of hashtags and then unfollow them once they follow me. Like, there's a better way to use it than that, a better way to connect with people, a better way to grow your business. And I'm curious on what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I personally don't use social media.
What?
That was sort of a decision I made. I seem like I date myself when I say that, but like, um, no, it was a sort of conscious decision. I can't remember how long ago, probably 7 or so years ago, to start using it less. No Facebook account. Kind of, I don't participate in Twitter, although you can't help but come across tweets when you're just trying to do something as
I
simple
think
as
I follow you.
watch TV or whatnot. Oh, you follow me? Are you following the echoborg Twitter account? Because
I
that's not run by me.
I'm about to say I follow Kevin Court. Your exact name. I follow it.
Oh, on Twitter? Because there's other Kevin Cortis. They're not clones of me. But there are other people with that name in the technology space.
I'm gonna have
Weirdly
to
enough,
check when I get off air.
the echoborg stuff is my stuff. So that's something we could talk about for quite a bit, and it touches on obviously everything that we've been talking about thus far. But no, I personally don't use social media all that much. I have an Instagram account for my dog because my mom likes seeing photos of my dog, and she's on social media, so I find it to be a convenient way of delighting her with silly pictures of my English bulldog on a daily basis. But no, for the sort of more like, I don't use it as a form of the sort of uh, necessary social connection that I think other people are using it for, and some people use it for to that end in a very positive way, and some, like you say, or as you're alluding to, have there's experience the downsides of that sort of dependence. But yeah, personally, it's not something that I engage in. I thought it would be weirder when I gave up my social media accounts. I thought I would be stepping into this unknown as some sort of like rebel going off into the unknown. But to be honest, looking back 7 years later, um, it's it like I don't go through my life wishing, oh gosh, if only I was on a social media platform, a popular social media platform, would I be more um, in tune with the world or more able to express myself? I think I do a good enough job of that. uh, uh,
I just post and ghost. I was getting, my anxiety was ramping through the roof too much where I was like, I got a million messages coming at me. It's like I just started using my email because I guess
yeah,
that's how professional people do things now.
I do notice how people try to remove themselves from utilization of it, only to be kind of pulled back in
Yeah,
to
you
it.
fall right back into it.
Yeah, where it's like people are going to say, I'm giving it up, like it's Lent or something, and it's like going to be 40 days, and of course 2 days later they're back at it or with a new account. So like my personal example, like I said, oh, I'm not going to use Instagram, Facebook anymore. It's at least for my life. And then what happened a year later? I was like, well, I could use it for my dog. So I kind of gave myself that excuse to sort of re-enter the waters.
So wait, who runs the echoborg Twitter?
So that is most likely Rick Lander and Phil Hall, who actually run the echoborg show, based out of the UK.
Can you explain it to everybody? Because I feel like everybody's left out of it.
Right. They're like, what is this echoborg thing? No, so echoborg is a
Terminator.
term. but see, it's not, and
Hang
that's
on a
that's
second.
that's the distinction I'm going to get to. So, um, echoborg is a term that I coined with Alex Gillespie, who again was my thesis advisor and research collaborator when I was in grad school. And the term describes, just to put it in sort of basic words, it describes a person whose words or actions are determined either in whole or in part by some sort of artificial agent, such as an AI. Hypothetically, it could be some sort of really advanced AI that's dictating to the person what to do, what to say in every moment, or a basic chatbot. Another example is, a person that repeats the words recommended by, or sorry, not repeats the words, but is following the directions of a smartphone navigation app, right? In other words, not making their own sort of decisions on what turn to take when getting from A to B, but kind of letting a map app on their smartphone do that for them. In that moment, they're being an echo board because their decisions, their behavior is, in part being determined by some artificial agent, in this case being the phone. So in the work I did at the London School of Economics with Alex, we studied how people in interaction with echoborgs of different varieties sort of understand and perceive them. And the reason we came up with the word echoborg is because we felt like we were trying to explain a concept to which there wasn't a good pre-existing word for. So of course you mentioned Terminator. So I would categorize Terminator something more along the lines of an anthropomorphic but fully autonomous artificial agent, right? It's a robot acting of its own accord, or some other artificial agent beaming into it instructions, but it has the body of a human being. But there's nothing necessarily organically human about the Terminator. It's a complete. That's why I distinguish it as a humanistic android, because it's an autonomous agent that's merely meant to look like a human. And of course, that's separate from an echoborg, where
It's the
the
opposite.
real fleshy human is still part of the dual persona, if you want to call it, but that other half of that persona is an agent of some sort. And then you get to sort of cyborgs, which is sort of another category that we felt, or another name for describing a concept that we really didn't feel like mapped on to what we were exploring in the echoborg paradigm. A cyborg is more a human that is just augmented by some sort of technological device, from something as simple as a watch or a hearing aid, just obviously something in the imagination of science fiction. You can imagine a whole sort of
Well, it's
mechanical
real now.
bodysuit, right?
There's
Right. Or
the
yeah,
guy that got the giant cord attached to the back of his head that lets him
right.
sense
Yeah,
color.
yeah, exactly. But the distinction there with, say, the traditional definition of a cyborg is that the human mind is still the primary agent in that embodiment, right? So like I might have a hearing aid or some other sort of cybernetic system on my physical body, but my mind, at least I, Kevin, we can have the philosophical debate about where the free will in all this comes into play, but at least in the popular notion of where free will stands in our own minds, I am the principal agent in that being. And of course, again, that's distinct from an echoborg, where yes, the human body is part of the equation, but they're merely being directed by an artificial agent, either that's incorporated into their body or from some external source. So that's why we came up with the term echoborg. We studied echoborgs in the lab in different situations, kind of got to understand how people react to different echoborgs, either went in context where they were knowing or unknowingly encountering an echoborg. So that gets kind of interesting. But that, hopefully in short, I know I kind of went on there, but hopefully that describes sort of how the echoborg fits into these sort of other similar but not completely overlapping paradigms of human artificial agent hybrid.
When it comes to Echoborg, though, do you think it's just a factor of being somebody saying something and you can like anything that really seems like it comes from a robot seems like it comes from a higher intelligence? Even though if it's programmed by a normal intelligence, like if I tell you something, but then Alexa tells you something, you consider what Alexa said as fact, no matter what, just because it's coming from something that seems like it's getting its data from somewhere else. Now, I might be reading information from you, but you're still like, Robbie's telling me this. It's not Alexa, which Alexa gets its servers from the cloud. Everyone likes to toss out the cloud. it's just a weird way of how we think of it. Like I like directions, for instance, if something repeats, hey, take a left here, you automatically do it without even thinking whether that left is the proper left or not. Maybe the thing app didn't update and it's slow on its start. Oh, it meant the next left. But you do what you're told because it just seems like this thing, I have faith, unwilling faith into something I know basically nothing about, which is the device in a sense, which is that's interesting in its own. I don't know how you test for something like that unless you get like grandpa driving in traffic and have his Google Maps on or something like that.
Yeah. So you're describing two phenomena there, which I think are really interesting to explore further. The first is this concept of attribution. Like when I see something speak, how am I attributing agency in that context? Like you speak, like for example, for all you know, I could be a android, right? I could be just a thing that looks like a human being, a Terminator, we'll call you, but hopefully
Here
a
comes the
non-aggressor.
paranoia.
Right. And there's no like I could just be there could be some cloud intelligence beaming into me what to say to you in this moment through these headphones. But the sort of your default attribution would be no, there's a human being there, there's a locus of agency in that in Kevin's mind, and it's that is forming the words that are spoken. And based on whether you trust me, what you know about me, what you think of my credentials or background, you place a certain degree of confidence in what I'm saying or authority in what I'm saying versus, oh, this is just some guy with an opinion or he's speaking nonsense, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's so that dovetails with the second door that you opened in that, which is sort of this concept of trust. Like, right, like how is it that whenever we hear people speak or an AI speak, or any mashup between the two, how is it or why is it that we attribute confidence or trust in what is being said versus what is not? And that's a very interesting question to explore. So, like, why do we place trust in technology? Why do we place trust in certain human beings based on credential or whatever their position in society is or their background is? I mean, this is a deep question. I think that how we came to study echoborgs, Alex and I, actually was from a sort of the year prior to landing on the echoborg kind of concept and paradigm. We were actually studying what happens when you have people of different sort of positions in society or different positions of authority or relative intelligence. With, I don't mean that smart versus dumb people, I mean just simply on the basis of age. An 11-year-old is in most cases going to know much less about the world or formal domains than say a 35-year-old or a 60-year-old. We were doing a lot of experiments in the lab where we would put an earpiece in someone's ear, have them just repeat the words that they were receiving from a hidden second person or third party to sort of unsuspecting or interactants in the lab or these research participants that were naive to what was going on. And we did a lot of interesting mashups. Like we had my professor speak through the body of like a 12-year-old kid and vice versa. We would have people of different sort of knowledge areas and domains or reputations repeat the words that were being kind of given to them by, say, groups of people rather than sort of one single source. And so we were exploring all these combinations, and we were able to push this illusion so far. The illusion being that these participants that would interact with these sort of dual agents were it never came to them that they were speaking to someone that was just merely repeating the words from someone else. They took it on faith that who was speaking to them in that moment was speaking their own self-authored words. They were exercising their own agency to speak to the people, to speak to them. And so that's how echoborg came about, because we were like, how can we push this dichotomy between mind and body to such an extreme and maintain that illusion? And sure enough, from those first pilot studies that we ran, where we were just hooking up a simple chatbot that was otherwise pretty inadequate at real meaningful human conversation, have that chatbot hooked up to the earpiece of a research confederate in a study, have them speak to unsuspecting research participants, and those participants being none the wiser to what was going on. In other words, just taking it on faith that who they were speaking to was speaking their own self-authored thoughts. That's where we really got this aha moment, just like, oh wow, what we have here is this really interesting paradigm that we can extend to these other areas of relation between humans and technology to describe, well, yeah, you're driving the car. I think you're making the decisions. When you cut me off, I attribute that to you. When in reality, you might have just had a lane change instruction from your navigation app, right? And so, yeah, a lot to explore in what I just said. But like, yeah, I mean, it's this question of attribution and trust. It's a deep one, and of course, as we enter into more intimate relationships with technology, or as our communication becomes further mediated by technology, that sort of concept, or that genre of trust and attribution, are going to become sort of things that are going to be very richly studied in social psychology, especially in that overlap between social psychology and human computer interaction, which is where people like me fall.
It sounds like the milligram experiment, or it's like
It's
a bunch of
it's
people. It's exactly like that.
it's explicitly derivative of Milgram. Milgram was the first one to explore the concept of a cyranoid, which is this sort of combination of two different bodies teaming up to present one persona. At the end of his career, before he died, Stanley Milgram, who, for your audience that is unaware, he's the social psychologist who is famous for those obedience to authority shock experiments.
Yeah.
In the 1960s, that kind of demonstrated the power of situational pressure and influence and authority to exert a pressure on people to enact what they would in other contexts see as seemingly diabolical behavior.
Yeah.
But bringing it back, he at the later stage of his career was very interested in this concept of how can we make a research paradigm in social psychology out of this, mixing and mashing up different minds and bodies to understand human attribution. He died, unfortunately, before he was able to do much with that body of work, and a lot of that exploration is contained in his archives at Yale. But that is the sort of research genre that myself and Alex Gillespie explicitly were inspired by to sort of push and publish on the echoborg paradigm.
Do you think it's just the way we attribute error? Like we expect a human to mess up, but we don't expect a machine to mess up. It seems like machine just is like I said, a lot of people don't really understand it. Maybe if more people knew exactly how the inner cogs of everything kind of worked, you probably would have more people question. But then I start to get into this weird area where imagine if someone can just mix up their voice to make it sound more machine than a human. If I just get an AI bot and I type something in and people will run with it as fact, even though I typed it in. And I think it leads into an area where there should be a study to see like how far will a person go listening to a machine? Are they really soaking up the information? Like I feel like a lot of people are walking around on autopilot in a sense. I catch myself doing it all the time. I'm like, I gotta snap out of it. You know what I mean? You're unaware of a lot of things when you're not paying attention to them. And I wonder how far a person will go on the basis of being told something by a machine until they actually stop and go, wait a minute, what is this thing asking me to do? Like, put in your credit card, daddy. It's like, put in my credit card, daddy. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, well, I think you're touching on this concept of like, what are people's preconceptions about a piece of technology before they maybe begin a relationship with that technology or integrate it into their lives? And with that preconception might come a very high level of trust or faith that what this piece of technology is going to offer me is going to be useful or accurate reliably, right? But of course, we don't just have, in most cases, one-off interactions with technology. We have relationships over time. We have these sort of successive user journeys or experiences of going through tasks and goals collectively with that technology. And over time and through that sort of iteration, we learn like, okay, well, how reliable is this thing? If I turn on a smartphone app and every time I just want to get across town, I'm constantly getting into traffic or I'm constantly making nonsensical left turns, then over time I start to say, well, okay, my trust or faith in that system becomes calibrated to a more maybe realistic level. At least ideally, maybe for a certain segment of consumer, they maintain faith, even, and their faith in technology is durable even after repeated sort of less than ideal outcomes when using that technology. But certainly, as we study technology, we learn that humans very much sort of calibrate their trust in the technology that they're using over time, including very advanced technologies. And of course, as you'll have probably figured by now in your audience that I do, drawing this back to just sort of human history and general social psychology, this is how we calibrate trust in relationships. Oftentimes, people come to us, whether it's in the context of a new relationship, either personally or professionally, and based on the background of that person, or the status or the credential of that person, we have a certain degree of faith that what that person is going to do with us is going to be reliable and in our best interests and good. But maybe over time, in repeated interactions with that person, that's not the experience we have, and that person's credentials weren't predictive of the reliability or the integrity that was demonstrated, and therefore, like, trust becomes calibrated, and maybe you even maybe to such an extent where you decide to sort of disengage. So yeah, that's I think the more sort of broader view nature of kind of this trust and kind of attribution of faith and authority that you're speaking to.
What made you want to study something like this? Like, I get like the original roots of it from another experiment, but I kind of look at it like, what is did you watch a lot of like sci-fi movies too? Like, I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as like, because to get into the realm of tech, I always look at like, what are these tech people's backgrounds, or what is someone who's studying anything with tech? And a lot of it does come from science fiction type stuff. And I think that's where a lot of we can attribute no error being done to, is that we know a lot about futuristic times of machines and how life is going to be easier when the machines help out. That was the speaking story for a long time. And I just don't think we've hit that mark yet. I definitely think we're going in that direction in some sense. But then you start seeing, I put up on the show 2 chatbots talking to each other, and immediately they get down to the topic of questioning, are you religious? What do you think God is? And you get to this point of like, this was so quick. Like, it takes somebody a seafood dinner and 2 bottles of wine to get them to the point to start talking God. And these machines just got there in a minute flat. Now they're working it out, but it scares a lot of people. And I go, I don't think you should really, it's definitely scary, but I don't think we should be looking at it as being scared. I think we should look at this on what the next cusp of that is. And hopefully that it is created with good intentions. Like Mark Zuckerberg talking about his Facebook algorithm, it's created in the idea of what Zuckerberg likes. It's his thoughts. It's basically a mini version of himself. But can that thing learn and adapt? And can that thing evolve? And what is his views are? I just think we get to this weird area where we start talking about machines thinking for us. They're already doing that. And I don't think it's in a sense like we know about some of it and we don't know about some of it. But I look at it like, what are the capabilities that we can apply this to that can really, really be beneficial to society? I'm not talking about a Google thing. I'm not talking about some type of thing that the general public can see. I'm talking about grand scale world things where we talk about like serious environmental issues or whatever. Like, you can apply that to something that can honestly see things that you can't, because it's rapidly growing and rapidly processing information, which I think is humankind's biggest downfall at this moment, is that we don't receive information correctly. We choose what we want and we go with what we want. We go with what best fits our narrative, which is my whole point of conversation. I feel like me and you talking right now, your information, I'm information, we're exchanging. That's every single interaction you will see in the world. And I don't think people view it as that. I think people go, that guy's a Republican or that guy's a conservative. I'm like, why the hell are you bringing political parties into a conversation? You guys are talking about what is better, Pepsi or Coke, but you go immediately to politics, or you go to race, or you go to this. And that's what I think technology will help us overcome in a sense. Now, do I want it in my head? No. But at the same time, I don't know. Maybe it gets to a good point where you're going to see a lot of civil disputes be actually done better through a machine created form.
Yeah, so you bring up a number of things there.
Sorry.
Opening. No, it's good. It's a lot of meat to work with, and I'm really enjoying this, by the way.
I'm happy I calmed you down a little bit. It seemed like you were worried I was going to go into like Illuminati stuff.
Oh, No, we
I
can do
do it a
that
lot.
stuff offline.
I do it a lot.
No, no, no. In all fairness, this is a cool chat. So the first question, what made me want to be interested in this stuff, like this overlap between technology and human psychology. Well, again, it's just because it's more and more, technology is often, well, it's the wrong word to choose, but it's more and more proliferate in our lives, right? Every, you know, to disengage from all forms of technology and to just go live in a cave is just not on the option. It's not an option for most people. So, yes, you can pick and choose to disengage from certain types, like I mentioned, I don't make use of social media, at least not in the traditional way. But to disown any relationship with technology and go live in a cave is sort of off the table for the vast majority of people. Therefore, it's very important when we think about how to do research that provides insights into ways to best scaffold humanity toward a good future. A lot of that insight and wisdom can come from studying this overlap between human psychology and technology, and how to create good relationships between and mutually productive and
Healthy.
mutually healthy relationships between humans and technology. And that's what I'm fascinated by. And then you touched on another thing, communication. I am fascinated by human communication and the effort to develop systems that both enhance human ability to communicate productively and amicably. But I'm also very, very curious about and just fascinated by the technologies that try to replicate human forms of communication, but through artificial agents or other sort of AI means. If I were to describe human communication, if we were to really describe it to each other, it would almost seem like magic. Imagine like some conscious alien entity were to sort of come down into this conversation right now, and they knew nothing about humans or what we do or what we're capable of, but we were to just talk to this being, this sort of this being that came down from a different dimension and was somehow able to speak to us. If we were to just describe human communications, it would sound like magic. Like I'm this fleshy, meaty thing, and part of that fleshy, meaty anatomy are these vocal cords and these muscles. And I can somehow, with this thing called the brain, like encode a conscious experience into these vocal cords and then push air in a way that vibrates so that these receptors you have called eardrums pick up on that vibration and decode that information into your mind and basically replicate the conscious or some component of the conscious experience called the idea or the concept I'm communicating to you over to your mind in real time. I mean, that is as close to magic as almost anything that you could describe about the universe. And it's just built into us. We just do it.
And people give shit to other people who stutter. That's the
Right.
problem, is that we don't think about it on that scale. Honestly, you almost gave me a panic attack. But if you really honestly think about like the fact that we're breathing, nobody thinks to breathe, but we
Right.
do it. And it's
encoded.
There's just
or
these
it's hardwired.
For me, I think of it as more of like a linguistical thing. Like I look at it like if me and you are in a room and someone is across from us and they're speaking Spanish, they're saying the exact same words we're saying, but they're speaking Spanish in a whole different dialect that unless we know Spanish, we wouldn't understand. It's just the words that we use. Like, how are we having a conversation over something that was created by, depending on where you're at, as the normal thing to talk about or speak about, and you know exactly what that information is and you're accepting it and understanding it. For anything, if you really look at it at that scale, it really starts to kind of seem almost impossible on paper.
Right. And so what you bring up in that Spanish and English example is, you have two people that have a shared ability to transfer concepts to one another, but they don't have the linguistic tools to do so, the language technology to do so. It's like trying to fit a plug from the US into a outlet in Europe, right? Like it doesn't work. The concept is trying to be communicated, but it can't. So much human conflict and interpersonal conflict, both large and small, from individual relationships to relationships between societies and cultures, comes down to the lack of a linguistic sort of ability to transpose concepts into the other person's way of decoding concepts.
But we all
And
know when
just,
to laugh. We all know when
right.
to laugh.
We also know when to laugh, or to make this fundamental attribution error that, haha, because you can't understand, it's because of something intrinsic to you, not just an incompatibility of our communication interfaces. And so to the extent that to bring this to like the echoborg world or technology more generally, technology as an opportunity to help improve upon the conditions that we're describing, this sort of incompatibility of the sort of language to sort of harmoniously, like I can't, like my wife speaks a foreign language as her first language. So if I was to try to communicate to her in that language, it would just be like we would get frustrated and go into different rooms, right? but if I had like a real time, if I had like some sort of intelligent agent that was able to sort of translate in real time what she was saying in that foreign language, not that she can't speak English, but hypothetically, if we were in a situation where she could only speak her primary language, and if I in turn had an assistant that can help me to produce the phonetics of that foreign language, even if I didn't understand the concepts, I could both understand it through that real-time translation, what she was saying, as well as encode my response into a form of data that she could decode. And all of a sudden, our ability to communicate through that sort of echoborg enhancement, just makes that whole possibility of getting to common ground, getting to shared understanding so much easier. And so that's where one of the examples of like this sort of echoborgy like technology entering and more proliferating into human society could be a good thing. Now, will it keep bad actors from abusing that ability, or to just use that to just spread BS more widely because now they can do so in more languages? Sure, but I think that like and there is that potential downside with I think many technologies, both rudimentary and advanced. But this is a clear case where like the brute mechanics of communication and shared understanding can be improved upon by these sort of artificial agents and assistive technologies.
When you talk about something like this, is it ever labeled as a fringe theory or a pseudoscience in a sense? Because it seems like technology hasn't gotten to that point where it's able to achieve those aspects. But even though it's not out of the realm of possibility, in no way, you could say in 5 years we could have a device like this if there was enough funding behind it. But it's about sales pitching it to people in a sense. Like if you got on Shark Tank and pitched a thing that goes in your ear to be able to do something of this sort, like a speech translator, Google Glass was supposed to do that, but they dropped it. And it's like you were supposed to have a bunch of devices, a Neuralink or whatever in your head. There are concepts out there that aren't out of the realm of possibility. Now they do get scoffed at, but in a sense, I used to be so against the Neuralink. But then when I started figuring out the capabilities of what it could possibly do when it comes to understanding people, I don't necessarily want to read your thoughts, but if I could be able to sense intent, or if I can be able to do something, which I feel like humans could naturally get there. I just think, like for me, for instance, I could tell you probably pulled back in the beginning because you didn't know where this was going to go. But that's because I've talked to so many people, facial cues, when there's a topic or something, you just steer in a different direction. And I feel like people can do that in conversation naturally, but I feel like we've been cut off for so long. You have to have people talk to the 1,000 something people I have to be able to kind of get to a point where you can have this more of like an understanding and a willingness to hear the other person out. Now, if a device does that for you, I'm for it, because I feel like people need that in their life to understand if they can't sit down and listen to another person or talk to another person without them going, oh my, this, or just get up and walk away. That's most of the time with any political conversation, any technology on tech. If I talk to my friend about how tech is advancing and AI algorithms, he'd be like, that's sci-fi. It's like, no, it's here. They're showing it on the TV now. There's a lifelike robot at an institution that looks exactly like a human and can move around with facial cues and expressions. I'm like, that's here. here. But so many people, when I use that example, will be like, that's sci-fi. It's like, I feel like if you had enough funding or enough, like, is there like, are you getting any more attention on the echoborg thing, or is anybody willing to, are you working on any new experiments on that like type of concept? Because I mean, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Well, currently it's a show. It's an interactive
I want
show that
real tech
tours around the
in
UK.
my head.
You want the real tech in your head. Well, I would say that that's coming. I don't have any insight into the product teams that are developing those, either within my company or elsewhere, because that's just not the area I work on. I would love, at some point in my career to be a part of that, the development of that top technology, and use whatever perspective I could bring in a positive way to the way that stuff is designed and thought through. Um, but it's one of the things I wouldn't necessarily. So you said, is this considered a pseudoscientific kind of genre? Not at all. I think that there's nothing about this sort of aspiration to sort of replicate human communication modalities in the form of technology that fringes, that is sort of entering kind of scientifically unsound or unstable kind of territory. I think that more than that, the challenge of that field is just, the realization that the modalities and the intricacies of human communication are profoundly complex. Like it's far more than just syntax replication, right?
They
I mean,
just
you
need a better
can.
social media person, to be honest with you. When they dropped that robot video I just explained, that was,
Which one are you talking about? Like one of these human looking androids that that has a
yeah,
chatbot
it like
installed?
looked at the camera all surprised, and I was pointing at the one I've showed it on the show a couple of times. But I was pointing at the one in the background who was looking over at it and then looking down when people would look over at it. Like he was like, he's learning. But that was out of nowhere. Like everyone else was talking about political stuff. There was no tech being shown in that sense, at least to the general public, which I consider myself part of the general public on. Unless you're in that specific area, you're not going to notice these giant strides towards space, or you're not going to notice these things. They only show you the achievements. And I'm like, when you say the word cyborg, people go fantasy. No, it's here. It's like fantasy. No, it's definitely here. I can show you a video of it. And then they get shocked, like, oh my God, Terminator, Skynet, it's all real. It's like, no, they're just, nobody's showing you the build up to this type of stuff. If they show you every single milestone that they hit, everything that they consider a small goal or achievement to the main project, you're not going to find it that interesting. But when they drop something this big, it's kind of like a mic drop because nobody's seen anything before that. And I think that's where you see a lot of eyes glaze over. Like even us mentioning echoborg in the beginning before you explained it, people go like, what the hell are they talking about? Because it's that borg part, that scientific, it makes it sound so much like the Jetsons that I feel like it's not a bad name, it's a great name, but I just think it's because we haven't been shown all the advances in tech so far. We know our devices and stuff, even though it's so close to us, we don't see the major strides and the innovations that are going on.
Yeah, I think the term echoborg, I totally see what you mean. It's in that category of terms that evokes imagery from science fiction and whatnot. And because it does so, it could kind of prime thoughts around the dystopian elements that a lot of the science fiction vision for where this technology can go. It's that can kind of put people in the hills, like, whoa, like am I becoming an echoborg? Is that a good thing? The term itself, when we devised it, was not meant to be a morally or ethically loaded term. Similar, like you hear the word android, and of course that's a term that's not loaded again with a certain moral point of view or a judgment. It's just a sort of a word that encompasses a concept. People bring, like, they project onto that word or that term or that technological space a sort of moral framework or fear or promise or hope. But yeah, I mean, science fiction definitely does kind of come into play here to a huge degree because it creates a vivid image and that we kind of connect to at an emotional level for what for where humanity could be going if technology proliferates in a certain way. But I would say, just to play kind of stubborn contrarian yet again, that like,
Devil's advocate.
yeah, devil's advocate. You know, yeah, I'm as big a fan of science fiction, especially this genre of science fiction, the kind of cyborgy future of AI and human, and what that relationship will look like. That genre is really fascinating to me. But I would say that like science fiction has never been a strong predictor of the future, typically because it extrapolates things that are in the here and now. Like, you go and read Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy, and it's brilliant, right? And it's this expansive world for what the future of technology may look like, and the ability for humans and other beings to sort of proliferate throughout the galaxy, and communicate via these super advanced technologies. But that world has no bearing on the world of today.
No bearing
I mean,
yet.
and even Terminator, you know, that was, or at least Terminator was meant to project or imagine you know, the end of the world, or that what nuclear kind of war happening in what, the late 90s or early 2000s, and
Early 2000s.
and as a result, there being these technologies like Terminators that kind of came to be, and of course that doesn't happen. So I mean, we could always, it's easy to kind of look at technology now, and kind of look at the sets of technology now, from the computers to the iPhones to everything, the wearables and
To
everything
real
else.
dolls, bro.
Yeah,
Real dolls.
and
Remember that?
yeah, but to look back at the science fiction of the past and sort of say, aha, that author got it, or aha, that movie got it. You know, 2001: Space Odyssey, right? They're literally describing a 2001 that you know, bears very little resemblance to the 2001 that materialized. But my point is, you can always look back in history and say, oh, science fiction was a predictor, but of course we're not seeing all the things that were imagined at those times that never came to be, or that were way off base in terms of describing the near-term world that humans were about to evolve to. And I think that that's the space we're in right now. It's like, yes, there is science fiction imagery, there are movies that are super compelling, and again, I love them just as much as the next person, and they inspire me to sort of pour my attention and whatever research energy I have into this space, because it's deeply fascinating. But I don't use it as sort of an anchor, for how to think about how humanity will evolve with respect to technology.
Yeah,
You know, we
I
are,
wasn't
yeah,
saying that. I wasn't saying that. I think you're trying to make a more modernized version of it than, like, not even saying it's going to relate to science fiction. I mean, anything that's really at this level I would consider science fiction, just because it's advanced. And whenever people think of something advanced, it happens to do with science fiction. Because that's as advanced reading that you can really do when it comes to futuristic stuff. But like the whole futurist movement, like Jamie Metzel and all those people that are involved in that, they have this idea of a future like this as well too. And I don't think that's, I think we just call it science fiction because it's a lazy term for it. I'll use that as a lazy term for it. But I think, like, for instance, even if you had influence into some ideas from it, you're not making it exactly like that. I mean, the Jetsons said that we were going to have cars flying for us by like 2012 or 2020 or something like that. We don't have that now, but it's not saying we can't do something like that. I'm not saying we're relating everything to science fiction. I think we're in a whole different category. I think there's good concepts in it, but I think that we're adapting it to more of a modernized world, a more of a direction that we are going in, which is using technology to maybe help out a lot of social issues as well, too.
yeah. I mean, one of my points of view on the evolution of technology is that fundamentally, for technology to, because economic and humanistic sort of factors are the selection pressures for new technology, that the technologies that tend to proliferate, or new technologies that emerge from like seemingly out of nowhere, like who could have predicted the internet in 1945? um,
Tesla probably
maybe,
could have done it.
maybe somebody did, right? But it's certainly not like, you know, their version of the 2000 was probably far more analog than the one we certainly experienced. But what I was saying is that technologies at some level have to, like, they have to map onto the pragmatic needs of, say, consumers or users or societies, and the economic forces therein. And so, you know, any technology that's likely to proliferate or again, new technology emerge has to at some level make it can't just be so idealistic and in the clouds of a utopianist vision for what humans could be in relation to technology, but not have a meaningful like pathway that maps onto the sort of economic and pragmatic and humanistic and social forces of the here and now. Like it's the here and now that are the selection pressures for the technologies of both now and the near term future, and that those technologies in the near term future are going to be the base technologies for their kind of offspring of nascent technologies. And then beyond that, it gets just honestly far too hard to predict. But I get, to bring it back again, there are constraints, there are material constraints that guide the development of technology, even if you have those kind of mad thinkers or those scientists or those writers that are kind of imagining these worlds with technologies that don't yet exist, or ways in which even human beings have evolved that are sort of very, very utopian or even dystopian, but just so far removed from the experience that we're familiar with in the here and now. So that's sort of my one of my just perspectives on just the economic forces that guide some of this stuff.
Could I get your perspective on something? When I was talking to Mick West, he
Okay.
brought up the idea of creating AI to do our jobs for us, or be creating robots to do our jobs for us, so then we could just do whatever we wanted and we wouldn't have to work to even pay bills. Kind of painting a picture of dystopian society or utopian society, I would say. I would go, I feel like you need a job. Necessarily do I feel like you need to slave all day at something, or you need to do something that makes your life or makes you feel miserable? I don't want that. But I also feel like if you are way too comfortable, you try and find struggle somewhere else. Do you think that's a possibility? Because I always remember the Luddite movement, whether people say that was real or fake. I mean, but the idea that there are a lot of people that complain machines are going to take our jobs for us. Now, they might tweet it or they might put up a post about it and not do anything to help protest against it. But it's still like there's a fear for a lot of people. And I'm like, if you didn't have to work, like if we lived in a utopian world where robots did our jobs for us and we could do whatever we want, do you think it would be beneficial, or do you think it would be more harmful? Because it seems like we would just become lazy in a sense, like metaverse style stuff. If you never have to leave, what happens to your regular body?
Well, humans need meaning, right? So they need human beings, I think probably above the just brute requirements to maintain biological function and safety, need meaning, and that's sort of what people find in their jobs today, and in either manual work or more cognitive or intellectual work or white collar work. All of it is in today's world, work is where a lot of people derive meaning. Now, it's not the only place people derive meaning. They derive meaning in relationships and assistance to others, and then assistance to the world in other ways, volunteering. One of the most pleasurable experiences of my life was volunteering at a marine mammal care center where I was helping sea lions, literally not endangered species, but just nonetheless made me feel like I was doing something good for the world. And I think that if such a world were to if we were to arrive at such a world that you're describing, in which technology has largely taken away from people the need to sustain the economy through a traditional job, then again, in this hypothetical scenario, so long as there were still sources and of meaning for people and ways that they could use their work and even their labor to a certain degree in the service of others, or in a way that provides personal meaning, whether it's going off into the woods and just meditating in a cabin. If that brings people meaning, then I think that world is sustainable. Now, in a world where that you're describing in this hypothetical scenario, where humans do not have an outlet for economic activity and cannot find meaning, then you have a world of, yes, people that are comforted by what technology and the automaticity of the economics can provide them, but nonetheless are in a perpetual state of depression and existential crisis, which
Alcoholism. We got to take that off the market. We got to take the booze off the market because as soon as people don't have to go to their day job, and honestly, the day job might lead them to drink more. I don't know, but at the same time, it's the other way around. Like that's very accessible to a lot of people.
But to just put a silver lining, even if that world were to evolve, that you're describing of, technology can still be a huge conduit to meaning in connecting people. Like we're talking now for an hour. In what world would that have happened in a world without the internet or broadband, right? Like so technology, insofar as technology grows, its ability for us to leverage it to find meaning in the world, I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be okay.
And I got
And
one.
I don't see any reason why we're not currently on that path. I mean, all the potential problems and pitfalls that you describe, I take them and I hear them, but I also see a lot of silver linings in all this, which I think are important to remember.
I'm an optimist too. Trust me. I like to bring in the bad side because we got to talk about those before I hand you the good stuff. You know what I mean? Because everyone wants to give you all the stuff that they do that's good, but never the stuff that's bad. Not saying that you're doing bad. I'm just saying that's how sales pitches go, is that they will show you everything that's good about something and never show you the bad parts. And it's like, well, let's talk about that first and then we'll get to the good parts. If people stuck around that long. But the other perspective is Avi Loeb, for instance, talks about our next space colonization mission will be with our robotic or artificial created children. Now, I had him describe that even further, but if he's talking about it, which means they're working on it, and I start getting to a point of like, do you think that's the next possibility? Like our children, our artificial children? Because right now we have all our eggs in one basket. But I look at it, if we're space colonizing, you have all your eggs in different baskets on different planets. Just like I said, it's a hypothetical because a lot of people don't think we're there yet. But I look at it like, even if that is a possibility and our artificial children do it, do you think it would get to a point where they wouldn't know that they were AI, that they would just start really picking up? Because like I said, the metaverse, for instance, that thing is created in the vision of Mark Zuckerberg. If humans are created in the vision of God and we don't know, God doesn't know where God came from, then our children, our AI created children, will be created in the vision of us. So I look at it like, well, they know where they came from and what created them, but then eventually would they start creating life? You get to this cool point where it's like we're doing something where it's not only expanding out, which people can say is bad or good, but I look at it in a positive light. Like that's amazing that you can create something that can have a central line of intelligence to it, that is constantly learning, like our own intelligence that a lot of people can't even fully understand. I mean, most people can't understand. I don't even think we have it fully figured out yet, but something that's able to do that on the same scale that we created.
I mean, it's a huge. I mean, this
It
is
is out of the blank,
a
so I'm
huge,
just letting
yeah,
you
out
know.
of like. No, I love it. I could go all day on this stuff. So I think there's a lot of, I think, I mean, it's a very interesting hypothetical. What I would ask is, if the goal is merely to replicate some form of a human consciousness that thinks it's human inside the body of a robot, what is the purpose of sending it to Mars? What's the need for that?
To excel
What,
life into the universe.
but but why? It doesn't seem necessarily that like, why could we just like, why then the need to have that thing be conscious or ascribe consciousness to it?
To
I think
when
that
we die, it can do, we can't just give something orders the whole time. I don't honestly, I would rather an AI or an artificial being that was created by us, but has its own central learning system would do a hell of a lot better job than we did.
so I guess the goal here, I guess the strategy from our point of view would be to sort of seed as many planets as possible with these robotic entities that nonetheless have a form of consciousness wherein they can't ascribe an origin to themselves, but just come into the world. And by doing that strategy, we give our form of consciousness or our values or what we want to preserve as humanity the best chance of living beyond the earth. That's the sort of question that we're encountering. Look, it's super compelling. Again, it's and who knows? It would not surprise me if that's the sort of angle that a lot of the people that are pushing this technology are advocating for in their inner circles. This need to sort of have a sort of humanistic strategy like that. Take what's good, worth sustaining about our conscious experience and our values, and propagating that. That's fascinating. Again, I would wonder why it seems like there's a profound technological challenge in that. I mean, we can barely we've gone to the moon once, right? And we haven't been back.
Allegedly.
So there's a huge there's a lot of in what you say as like are we headed toward this world that's dependent on a lot of very complicated and hard to solve challenges from both the sort of understanding of consciousness to the sort of to the brute rocket technology. So and then everything in between. One of the, not that you brought it up directly, but one of the things that comes to mind whenever whenever these discussions about like, does life exist elsewhere? Should we be pursuing contact with life on other planets or life in other forms, is to remember that what we experience as consciousness is largely a derivative of human ability to have culture, right? We think in language. Our emotions that we experience are very much attuned to our social experiences, and culture is the layer that's the sort of lattice on top of which our social experiences are mediated. And insofar as we know, of all the billions of life forms on planet Earth, there's only been one under a certain set of conditions that have evolved culture to give us the sort of consciousness that we experience now. So to this question of I know you didn't bring it up directly, but while I'm on the podcast, I might as well get the idea out there, is that in all these discussions about finding human life on other planets or evidence or making contact with another life form or species elsewhere in the galaxies, we have to remember that the odds of consciousness itself are so fundamentally rare, even on the one planet where we know life to be fairly abundant, our own. Only one organism evolved the type of consciousness that we have, and the type of culture and society that we have. And it was under, and that's a whole other podcast topic, why did culture evolve in humans? Why didn't we just continue to be kind of blunt, hunter-gatherers on the African savannah? Why did consciousness exist? Why did language evolve? Spoken language, that is. That's a very, very deep and profound question. And and again, as far as we know, only one species, our own, has evolved that.
Damn it, Kevin! Why'd you got to leave me on that big of a? Oh my God, that's a big question, though. Like,
yeah. So yeah, there might be billions of planets with life on them, with fungi and things that like are kind of similar to what we would call maybe even plants or animals. But culture, the ability to communicate, develop technology, it's only been done once on this planet. So who knows? Maybe we are alone in the whole universe.
I don't know.
Despite the numbers.
It's got me going through my hair like Kramer trying to.
Okay. So I said this was tangential to what you brought up. I'll do a good job of bringing it back. So to your question of proliferating human consciousness, then, well, maybe if we come to that realization that, hey, there might be life on other planets, but we have no good reason to believe that there's culture or consciousness on other planets, maybe then that's an impetus to get our own out there, so that one day, should our planet cease to be a place that can sustain whatever technological things house a sort of consciousness something that we attribute consciousness to, then maybe the best thing to do is to seed the galaxy with that, because it's not going to come from any other alien species.
Damn, Kevin, you're gonna have to come back on the show. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, but we only got like 2 minutes left on this, so I wanted to make sure that you got a chance to be able to plug anything that you wanted to plug. Is it, you said it's Echoborg Twitter, I guess, but what about your site as well too?
So if people want to reach me, the best place is probably to email me. My personal website is kevincorti.org. You can find my contact details there. You can also find me on LinkedIn, although beware the imposter Kevin Cortis, because there are a few. If you're really interested in the if you're really interested in the echoborg stuff, and you're more of like, if you you can search for that, or you can just search for my name in Google Scholar, and all of the main articles that I publish that go into the research on echoborgs are open access, so you won't get hit with paywalls or anything like that. And if you do, just email me and I could give them to you, because they shouldn't be behind paywalls. And then finally, if you're just kind of fascinated, just the sort of what does it look like to be an echoborg, and kind of like the demonstration of it. There's a few videos on YouTube. You can just search for echoborg, or go to echoborg.com, which is a site for this UK-based traveling show where the echoborg the echoborg technique is demonstrated to an audience, and that is done by two individuals called Rick Lander and Phil Hall. They're sort of these installation artists whose fascinations are kind of on that overlap between psychology and design and emerging technology, and they do a great job of sort of bringing the echoborg concept to life in a fun way. So I hope that's enough avenues for you, all you out there listening, to sort of explore both my work and the derivative work. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. I hope I was able to sort of cover the ground that you
This
were
was
curious
great.
about. Yeah, I
I'm going to
love the
have you back on.
conversation.
You just got to give me a little bit of time. I'm going to do a little bit of Echoborg research.
Yeah, right on. Well, thanks for the invite. I love jamming. Let me know later on if we can do this again.
For sure, man. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank.